Welcome, everyone, and good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Anna Marie Slott. I'm the co-chair of the Women of Influence Committee, together with Jennifer Parks. My other day job is as a partner of Ashurst, an international law firm, and the head of their high-yield group. It's really my pleasure to welcome you this morning and today to the 12th Annual Women of Influence Conference. This is kind of an important year, similar to the Chinese zodiac that has 12 signs and 12 years. You know, I feel like we're really at a place where we can look both back to see what we've done and also forward to see what's possible. And I think the theme of this year's conference of evolution or revolution is really a good opportunity to see where we can go and how we can get there. The rest of my 2.5 seconds of speech here is all going to be logistics. If everyone can just turn off their phones, that would be great. As you see, everyone will have name tags on. People who are having gray badges are people who are not yet members of AmCham. You don't have to be American. People with red badges are governors and trustees. Committee chairs and vice chairs have yellow badges, and members have blue badges. So just so that you understand what the color sequencing is. We are also tweeting during this conference, so feel free to tweet or, if you have a Twitter account. It's hashtag AmChamHK. Also wanted to thank, obviously, our very, very generous sponsors. We have Mont Blanc, who is sponsoring the gifts today. Jennifer and I were trying to figure out how we got onto that list, but it's not to be. We wanted to thank our gold sponsors, Goldman Sachs and White & Case, our webcast sponsor, who is Intercall, our silver sponsors, who are Calvin Klein, Eversheds, our bronze sponsor, Chinese University of Hong Kong Business School, Emerson, Gall, JLL, Typhoon Consulting, and of course our media sponsor, the FT. So thank you to all. And our online nomination supporting organization, which is HKTDC. It gives me now great pleasure to welcome onto the stage Ron Lee, who is our opening morning keynote. Ron's impressive biography is in your pack, so I won't introduce him. More than saying he's an MD of Goldman Sachs Asia. Ron, if you could join.
Thank you very much for inviting me back, Anne-Marie. I must say, last year when I was at this event, it was to receive the award for the Women of Influence Champion for the advancement of women, and it was a real pleasure. I still remember it with great fondness. But if I may make a confession, right now I'm finding it quite terrifying to be here. And let me explain why. As I said, it was a real pleasure last year receiving the award for the advancement of women. But it was actually an award that I felt like I was receiving on behalf of my fantastic colleagues at Goldman Sachs and heroic figures like Alia Ayers at Mother's Choice, who do such terrific work in our community. Beyond all that, it was my first opportunity to have a ballroom full of well-dressed women listening to me. I don't really know what's not to like about that. Actually, I've spent my entire adult life trying to get just one woman to listen to me. And in fact, that woman is sitting back there. It's my wife, Uni. We've been married for 20 years, and last year was the first formal speech that she's ever heard to listen to me make. This is the second time she's agreed to listen to me make a speech, and unless you invite me back again next year, Anne-Marie, it may be the last. Being in front of you this year is scary, first of all, because I haven't won an award, at least not as far as I know, but the event ends at 2:30, so there's still time for a last-minute change. Second of all, my role last year was simply to not fall over getting on and off the stage and to say thank you, and I figured even I could manage that. Finally, at last year's event, I was told repeatedly to speak for fewer than 3 minutes. I wasn't offended in the least that the organizers kept telling me to keep it brief, keep it brief. Actually, I was quite relieved. This year, on the other hand, I've been given 15 minutes to say something on the interesting theme, evolution or revolution, how will you succeed and excel at work in 2030? But I expect that Uni, my wife, is going to get up after 3 minutes because that's what she's come to expect based on my speech last year, and I don't think she'll be able to stand much more. So, terrified as I am, let me have a go. 2030. What can we expect to achieve by 2030, 15 years from now? On one level, maybe we can achieve a lot. Any of you who have children who are around 15 years old will know time flies. My wife and I have children who are 12, 14, and 16, and if I had $1 for every time we asked each other where the years have gone, I would have retired long ago. If you'll look on the slide, sitting here in Hong Kong on the doorstep of China, we know that much can be achieved in 15 years. To the left here, you'll see on the screen a picture of the Pudong district in Shanghai 15 years ago. Here's Pudong today. So a lot can happen in 15 years. Can we have all of our listed companies here in Hong Kong with boards that are comprised of more than 30% women by 2030? After all, studies show that Fortune 500 companies, which have the highest representation of women on their boards, significantly outperform those with the lowest representation. Specifically, return on equity for companies with the highest percentages of women board representation exceed those with the lowest by 53%. By 2030, can we work in a society where there's no doubt that men and women have the equal opportunities to work? Right now, the women represent half the world's population. They only represent 37% of the world's GDP. In 2030, my 12-year-old daughter, Sophia, will be 27 years old. Maybe she'll be an associate at Goldman Sachs fresh out of business school. If so, will she hear stories about our firm in 2015 and ask me in amazement, "Daddy, was it really like that back then? Were the vast majorities of senior leaders men? It wasn't 50-50? If I did a survey in this room and asked each of you whether we believed we could have gender equality by 2030, I suspect that many of you would respond to the question by saying, maybe. Others, the optimists, would say, absolutely. And the pessimists, not so much. I'm not smart enough to make predictions, so I don't want to speculate on what things will be like in 2030. Instead, as Anne-Marie suggested, I'd like to submit 3 things that we can do today to get where we want to be in 15 years. To know, to teach, and to believe. As the Greek aphorism goes, know thyself. But how well do we really know ourselves and our hidden biases? For those of you who can't read the text at the bottom here, it's 2 snails looking at a tape dispenser, and the text says, "I don't care if she's a tape dispenser, I still love her." The psychologists Mahzarin Banaji and Anthony Greenwald, in their book Blind Spot, The Hidden Biases of Good People, have done some amazing work which forms the backbone of our firm's training on unconscious biases. They highlight that since 2010, the ranks of women in the U.S. non-farm payroll has exceeded men. 64.2 million women, 63.4 million men. However, according to their gender stereotype test, 75% of men associate the word male with the word work and the word female with the word family. 75% of men have an automatic stereotype that men work and women stay at home, even though more women work than men, according to the non-farm payroll statistics. To be brutally honest, I went online and took the same test myself, and embarrassingly found myself in the 75% of men who unconsciously associate the word male with work and the word female with family. But I found myself in some very interesting company. Apparently, their studies show that 80% of women show the same automatic stereotype associating the word male with work and female with family. I was recently both inspired and haunted by an episode at my firm which relates to this topic. At Goldman, we try very hard to identify future women leaders early and to give them every opportunity to get promoted. One of the specific measures that we've deployed is a program called the Hot Seat. In this program, the most senior leaders of the firm hold meetings where the business managers are expected to describe their pipeline of women candidates one by one. Managers are expected to explain what each woman's prospects for promotion are and what they are doing to help them. These sessions are taken very seriously and often get quite uncomfortable, hence the name of the program, the Hot Seat. For example, a manager is likely to be asked, what are you doing to ensure that your high potential women are getting the right kind of exposure to senior leadership in our headquarters in New York? What are you doing to give them stretch assignments? And have you assigned thoughtful, powerful mentors to your most promising women candidates? In one such session, our chairman for Asia Pacific, Mark Schwartz, presided over the questioning of a manager regarding his female promotion candidates. As the manager was working his way through the list, he described one of his best. She's smart, hardworking, but a little aggressive. Before he could go on, Mark sharply cut him off and said, "Could you repeat what you just said?" And the manager, taken aback, obliged by tentatively saying, "She's smart, hardworking, and a little aggressive." Mark cut him off angrily and said, "You run one of the toughest business units at the firm. How could you describe her that way? You know that if she were a woman, you would describe her as smart, hardworking, and aggressive. From now on, we're not going to have a double standard where being aggressive is positive for a man and negative for a woman. Do you understand me?" The manager sheepishly agreed and indicated that he understood. On the one hand, the story was an inspiration because Mark had astutely and publicly pointed out an unconscious bias. On the other hand, I was haunted because I could easily see myself with the same unconscious bias making the same mistake as the poor manager who was on the hot seat that day. The second thing we must do is teach. Again, for those of you, I apologize for the script, but this is a cartoon, and the text reads, "You drive, I'll criticize," the man speaking to the woman. From time to time, I'm asked how I got involved in the topic of diversity. At some level, I'm an unlikely candidate. I went to an all-boys junior high and high school. In college, I hung out mainly with a group of football players who studied a little but mainly drank a lot of beer. And then I entered the male-dominated world of investment banking. I remember when our president of Asia Pacific asked me to become the co-chair of our firm's diversity efforts here in Asia. I didn't resist the request, but I was puzzled by it. As a, quote, guy's guy, I thought of myself as an unlikely candidate for the role. But I still thanked him, mainly out of courtesy. Later, when I asked him why he had invited me to become co-chair of diversity, he said, "Because you're energetic and I knew you'd say yes." So basically, I got involved in the firm's diversity efforts because I reminded our president of his pet Labrador retriever, enthusiastic and obedient. These days, I regularly thank him for giving me the opportunity. It has been a terrific chance for me to learn about the firm, about working with women, and about myself. I've thoroughly enjoyed the journey, and I fully suspect that I will continue to do so. But above all, it's given me terrific street cred with my two favorite feminists, my wife and my daughter. Before getting involved in our firm's diversity efforts, I would have thought that gender equality was primarily something that women should drive. I was not familiar with the concept of he for she and the notion that men may have as important a role to play in gender equality as women. I might not have known what he for she was because I grew up in an all-boys school system or because I only worked in the testosterone-driven investment banking industry. But mainly, I think I didn't know because I was uneducated on the subject. To get our companies and society to where we want to be by 2030, we must adopt the mindset of the teacher? How do we get inside the minds of those who we want to learn? How do we pique the curiosity among those who are ignorant, skeptical, or even hostile to the reality of where things need to be by 2030? Since realizing how interesting and important the topics of gender equality and diversity are, I've been like a moth to a flame. What started for me as a position taken up out of a sense of corporate citizenship has become an area of great fascination and gratification. I'm not an educator by training, but I'm reminded of a tenet that we often use in my business on the sales side. The maxim is, people hate to be sold things, but they love to buy things. We must think deeply about how to create the sparks in teaching moments that will lead to the flames of curiosity. We must adopt the mindset of those teachers who have moved us most. Let me conclude with my observation that we need to believe. On my left, you'll see a photo of Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile in 1954 with a time of 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds. Prior to this achievement, experts said that human beings were not capable of running a mile in less than 4 minutes. In fact, Roger Bannister is quoted as having said, "Doctors and scientists said that breaking the 4-minute mile was impossible and that one would die in the attempt. Thus, when I got up from the track after collapsing at the finish line, I figured I was dead." And yet, his Australian rival, John Landy, broke the 4-minute mile later that month. Within a year of Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute barrier, 24 other runners ran sub-4-minute miles. And today, it's not uncommon for high school runners to run a mile in under 4 minutes. So what is it that made it possible for Roger Bannister to achieve something that people thought was impossible? Belief. Roger Bannister was not constrained by what scientists and doctors said. He was not constrained by the past. He was not constrained by pain or difficulty. He believed he could do it. If you told me in the year 2000 that a woman would be elected the president of Korea, I wouldn't have believed it. If you told me in the year 2000 that in 2015, one of the most important people in the world would be the German chancellor, I would have believed that. But if you told me her name was Angela, I wouldn't have. And if you had told me in 2000 that by 2015, a woman named Sheryl Sandberg, who graduated from Harvard 1 year after I did, would go on to be the COO of a company called Facebook, and that company, which didn't exist at the time, would be bigger than Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley combined, I wouldn't have believed any of it. But the fact that I wouldn't have believed didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that President Park, Chancellor Merkel, and Sheryl Sandberg all believed. Like Roger Bannister, they didn't let what other people thought stop them. They didn't let the past stop them. And they didn't let the pain required to achieve their goals stop them. Like Roger Bannister, they endured and they believed. Today, each of them believes that although they are the first women in their respective roles, they will not be the last. And today, they believe that at some point in the future, maybe even by 2030, we will be able to say we live in a truly equal world. And as Sheryl Sandberg put it, a truly equal world will be one where women run half our countries and companies, and men run half our homes. But let there be no doubt, we must be demanding of ourselves on this journey to 2030. But in those inevitable moments of frustration, we should all remember the words of Roger Bannister, who said, "However ordinary each of us may seem, we are all in some way special and can do things that are extraordinary, perhaps until then even believed impossible." Whether it's evolution or revolution, to achieve our goals by 2030, we have to believe. We have to believe in the extraordinary, even the impossible. Thank you very much.
You have to stay.
Okay.
Sorry. Are there any questions from the crowd? If you do have a question, just raise your hand and identify yourself and where you're from. We have about 5 minutes for questions, so. They're speechless.
Okay.
Oh, wait. They're not speechless.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Parks from White & Case. I have a question for you. I'm curious about the programs at Goldman. I was wondering, is there a program or is there anything that you've seen create more change than others in terms of the programs that you have for gender equality?
Jennifer, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. I don't think that, at least from my perspective, I cannot think of a single program that has made like sort of this watershed change. I think of it more as sort of a little bit of like the arc that we're on. And I think like many things as it relates to diversity or gender equality specifically, I think we find ourselves in a place where at the most senior levels of the firm, we have sort of unquestionable support. I think Lloyd and our management committee are great. I think when it comes to the programs and what we're doing, I think that the big change or what we're trying to do is to get to that tipping point where we're pushing down that sort of buy-in and the acceptance that we experience at the top of the firm down to people who run regions and then down to people who run desks, because that's really where the rubber meets the road. And I feel like most of what we're trying to do is to try and make sure that everything that is believed quite deeply, I think, within the senior levels of our organization sort of percolate down into the organization. And I think that one of the things which is, I guess, more recent development is I think we're trying to marry up just the general concept of manager effectiveness, like how you run a business, together with our diversity efforts. Because if you think about it, actually, what we're trying to do, I mean, some people might argue that a financial services organization is just an ideas machine, and that the more diversity you have, the better ideas you'll come up with. And so that as a result, there's not gender equality, diversity over here, and manager effectiveness over here. Creating an inclusive environment is being an effective manager. And so I think that that's sort of where we are on the arc.
Hi, my name is Sophie Guerin, and I am with Dell. Thank you so much for your comments. They were quite inspiring. I was just wondering, I think that your journey as certainly a male champion of change is something that is all food for thought for us, and quite interesting. And I wonder, too, you mentioned the environment that you work in. How do you, within, amongst your own leaders, how do you encourage your own teams to perhaps consider a similar journey? How do you advocate for being a male champion of change within your own organization? You talked a little bit about the hot seat, but I wonder, is there anything else that you do within the organization to perhaps advocate for individuals who may be coming from a similar place?
So, I think, like Jennifer's question, I guess I wouldn't say that there's any one thing. I mean, I think it's many, many things. But if I wanted to single one thing out, Sophie, that I think relates to your question is, I think, we're very focused on some of the symbolism around this. So, for example, we have a female network for the managing directors. So the female managing directors is basically the most senior title you can have and the most senior women that we have. And historically, that has been co-chaired by 2 women. And this year, actually, they took the decision to make one of the co-chairs a man, a senior partner in the securities division called Tom Morrow, who some people in this room may know because he's American and quite a well-known, sort of long-standing Hong Kong figure. And I think it's been really terrific because I think that, I think the gist of your question is how can we bring more men into feeling ownership of this thing? And I think a little bit like me, Tom was a varsity football player at Dartmouth, and he's a big, burly, handsome guy. And I think there's a little bit of feeling like, if Tom can get behind this, with the kind of energy and intensity that he is, and, I think anyone can. And so I think the symbolism of things like that is pretty important. I think the second thing that I would say is, something like that for Tom, and maybe to me to a lesser extent, some of these people are just waiting to be asked. They're sort of laying in wait. They don't even really know that they're an advocate, but they're just waiting to be asked. And I think, as in my case, when given the opportunity, it's really illuminating. It's really great. But, had the president not taken note of the fact that I was enthusiastic and obedient like his dog, I might not have gotten as involved in it as I had. Please.
Sorry, I'm Beatrice Remy. I work for WRG. We're a creative agency. So in my case, we are a female-dominated industry, similar as public relations. So I certainly believe in diversity more than anything. But besides doing the right thing, have you linked it to your success in business? Have you linked diversity or empowering your woman and having male championship to the bottom line? Have you built a business case? Or is this just about citizenship?
Well, I think, I would say two things about that. First of all, I grew up in the investment banking side of the business for the first 21 years of my career, and in the last 4 years, I've moved to the private wealth management side of the business. And as some of you may know, the wealth management side of the business is very heavily female-dominated, because half the people more than half probably, of the people who are making decisions as it relates to investments when it comes to personal wealth are actually women. So if you look at, the percentage of women in my business, it's much higher than in the rest of the business. So I think I really go into that not so much to say what a great job I'm doing as it relates, because I inherited that kind of situation. But I think that, I guess I would focus on two things. One is, we don't tie it per se, but I think that we're quite commercially rational. And I think the fact that we have a high percentage of women because a big percentage of the stakeholders and clients are women is just us being commercial. But I think that the other aspect of that as it relates to diversity is, again, and I have to commend our leaders. I mentioned the story about Mark Schwartz, and he'll be the first one to tell you he is the biggest advocate for diversity. But the language that he uses about this is that we're doing this because we want a meritocracy. And I think that's a very important thing, because I thought maybe when you were asking the question, you were sort of asking about quotas and this type of thing, because from time to time that comes up in the conversation of, should we set a quota of, how many people we want. But I think we're very data-driven and very quantitative by nature, and so I would say that we do think about the numbers and we look at them all the time. But I do think that when we think about that, we're probably more inclined to think about targets as opposed to quotas. And I think really what we're hoping is we can get to a place where this is really more about meritocracy as opposed to citizenship.
Thanks, Ron, for your inspiring speech, and I love the way you tie it back to your speech last year. I'm Esther Ma. I run my own PR company called Prestige, and I've known Ron for ages. I have 2 daughters too, so Ron, what are 3 pieces of advice you would give to Sophia to become a future woman of influence?
Well, Esther, I have to say, so Esther, she says, has 2 daughters. We have 2 sons and 1 daughter. And before I answer your question, Esther, and as I try to think of 3 things, I just want to share that, when I started, well, when I didn't have any children, Uni had them all. So when we started having children, we started with 2 boys. I was like, keep them coming. As many boys as we can get, that'll be great. And then when the third, turned out to be our daughter, I was like, okay, well, that'll be fine. And after about a month after Sophia was born, I had this like really oppressive feeling of, is there some way to trade the 2 boys back and get another daughter in exchange? Because if I had it all to do over again, I would have done it the way you did it, Esther, not the way that I did it. So, I think the 3 things that we talk about among many are, number 1, that she should not feel like she needs to take a back seat to her brothers. Now, you don't have that in your situation, but I think that the principle holds. And, that's been a big thing for us growing up. The second thing that I think we're very focused on is, like many women or girls, I guess, she sort of started out better at English and history and not so good at math. And I think one of the great things at HKS they did was to not box her into, you're good at reading. I mean, she reads more books than I do, and you're not good at math. The language that we use with her is, Sophia, you're not as good at math as you are in English yet. And I think that is embedded in a lot of what we try to convey to her is that, you're on this journey and don't count yourself out of anything. And the third thing that I want to cite is more to do with me, which is Sophia's quite loud. She's physically like a really loud voice. In fact, her uncle observed that, when you talk to kids, like indoor voice, outdoor voice, indoor voice, outdoor voice. And he's like, Sophia, she only has outdoor voice and stadium voice. And I think that it was a little bit around reading Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. That sort of reflected, because we'd go, when she'd start talking and she'd get excited, and, by the way, see point number 1 above, don't let your brothers push you around. We found ourselves a lot saying, Sophia, shh, not so loud, Sophia. But that was an unconscious bias on our part, right? We never did that to our sons, and they're pretty loud too. But somehow we thought that it's unseemly for girls to be outdoor voice and stadium voice. Fine for boys. By the way, she gets that from me. So I guess the third thing would have to be that, teach us. Teach us about the things that we may be doing to you, the way we may be directing you that we may not even know.